Hi, welcome to this week's webinar, which continues our series really looking at the ISMM Level 5 unit, Unit 501, which is understanding and developing customer accounts. For the last few weeks, we've been simply taking a look at some of the key areas of the unit and put our twist on each of those particular areas. Today, we're going to talk about the preferred suppliers list. And this, for many of us, seems to be a dark art, particularly in terms of how on earth we get onto there in the first place. So, in terms of the ISMM Level 5 criteria, this is 1.3 in Unit 501, reviewing the concept of the preferred suppliers status. So, one of the things that Craig Thompson's at CustomerCentricity says is being your customer's preferred supplier means that your enterprise is perceived to provide services of a higher value to that customer than the corresponding services of your competitors. In this regard, he says, preferred supplier status goes beyond product and price to comprise the set of activities that define doing business with you. And I guess you can almost go one step further here and really say that it defines the set of activities that make you easy to doing business with. And that's really the key, I guess, to having a PSL, is having those service level agreements set in place that makes you as an organization very much fit in with the company that you are supplying. For example, a mining company, Rio Tinto, they very much have detailed exactly what they expect from their suppliers from their procurement perspective. Safe and efficient and innovative suppliers are strategically important to the success of Rio Tinto. In the interest of a fair and competitive marketplace, we apply the same evaluation and selection process to all prospective suppliers. So I guess that, if we pause there for a moment, is quite a key part of the preferred supplier status. It's really to ensure that companies are operating on very much a level playing field. Rio Tinto expects that all suppliers are aligned with their business objectives, including aiming to achieve zero injuries and zero fatalities, enhancing value, increasing operating and or energy efficiencies, reducing and or eliminating waste, and lastly, reducing total cost of ownership for all of their customers. So that very much sets out exactly what you need to do as a supplier if you want to work with these guys. And then it really goes into a whole list of other areas. So for example, being financially secure, etc., etc. Now, each organization you work with will have a different set of criteria. And we'll talk a little bit later on into some of the areas, some of the ways that you can get onto the PSL. But why do it in the first place? What is important? Why do organizations actually have a PSL? The Supply Chain Council in the US talk about a number of criteria, attributes, if you like, as to why companies should have a PSL. But three of them are reliability, responsiveness, and cost. In terms of reliability, they talk about having the perfect order fulfillment. This isn't just being right in one or two areas. This is being right in a number of areas. It's having the right product, the right quantity, delivering the product to the right place at the right time, in the right condition in terms of packaging, etc., having the right documentation, and indeed sending it to the right customer. So all of these will be key areas in terms of the perfect order fulfillment. In terms of responsiveness, it's all about the timeliness of the order fulfillment and responding in the way that the SLA, the supplier's agreement, was actually set out in the first place. It's having flexibility to be able to change the timing as and when that is required. And lastly, cost. One of the key areas about being on a PSL isn't just how much you charge for the unit. It's often the total cost of dealing with that organization. So it's those surprise costs, those hidden costs. It's ensuring that the total engagement costs for when you work with this organization are included and do not exceed what was laid out in the contract to begin with. So there's some of the areas that the Supply Chain Council say that are actually key to the way that you work with an organization. But what are some of the problems for you as a vendor being on a PSL? Well, I guess, again, CustomerCentricity Incorporated talk about a couple of areas in particular. One is the return on investment. Are you getting the return, the value from the contract that you intended? There may be many strategic reasons for entering into a preferred suppliers agreement, but you need to measure and ensure that you are getting the benefit. You know, you don't want a loss leader. If you did want a loss leader, what's the value that you're achieving? Because clearly it's not in terms of profit, it's in terms of profile, status, an opportunity to work in a certain sector. So you've really got to understand what is your return on the investment. It could be that you're not so much a preferred supplier, you're just a lower cost provider. And you know what? You'll only be a lower cost provider until the day that somebody else comes in and is cheaper than you. The second area is all about capability in terms of problems of being a preferred supplier. Because often we engage and we apply for certain tenders to become on a preferred suppliers list, but we're not really knowing if we have the capability to deliver against these contracts. Therefore, once the contract starts, pretty soon we identify that we cannot deliver. Next thing we know is that we're incurring various fines, penalties, because we're not meeting the areas on the PSL. Therefore, we're not actually meeting our service level agreements. So how do we actually become a preferred supplier? Well, quite frankly, you need to look at the individual company and their list of criteria. It's probably the easiest way is to look at government tenders and understand, are you meeting the different areas, the different ISO qualification criteria, the different minimum criteria that the organization expects you to have to be able to work with them. So how do we actually get onto a preferred suppliers agreement? Well, you need to look at the individual company's criteria. As we saw with the Rio Tinto example, they have various expectations from their suppliers. And if you can't meet those criteria, then you probably shouldn't bother applying in the first place. So it very much is done on an individual supplier-vendor relationship basis. So take a look at their criteria, have a good look at yourself in the mirror and decide whether or not you meet those criteria, and then obviously go for it. But what does this give you? Being a preferred supplier, does it mean that you automatically will win any contracts, bids, tenders that are put up? Well, no. In 2007, there was some case law, Proforce Recruit Limited versus Rugby Group Limited. And the outcome, the judge dictated that actually being a preferred supplier did not give you sole supplier status, or that you as a supplier could expect to be approached first. It remained open to the defendant to decide whether other suppliers should be granted a similar status, and the defendant could not commit itself to doing only business with such suppliers. So just because you're on a PSL doesn't mean that you are now given exclusive rights, if you like, to bid for any contract. And that leads us, I guess, onto the last part of this webinar, is that if you're not on a PSL, does that mean that you can never do business? Well, with certain organizations, such as government organizations, that often is the case. But with private corporations, often it isn't. I put here the marriage certificate. Just because you're married doesn't necessarily guarantee fidelity. And I guess that's the same with a PSL. Just because there's a PSL in place doesn't mean that organisations can't circumnavigate that PSL. Do you know what? Often companies say they have a PSL, but when you challenge them and ask them, do you actually have a PSL? Can I have a copy of it? They won't know where it is because maybe it was put together years and years ago. It may no longer be fit for purpose. So actually, the procurement department should be seeking other organisations to be able to pitch for this business. Why? Well, because actually the PSL that was organised could be out of date, and actually you could be providing a much better service. So an organisation recruitment coach have come up with, particularly in the world of recruitment where PSL seem to be, I think, more placed than most other sectors. They've come up with a few different ways that you might be able to circumnavigate the PSL. The first thing is the spare tyre. What do we mean by this? Well, you know, it's on your car you have 4 tyres, okay? Do you need another one? No. Well, yes you do, because if one of the other ones actually fail you, okay? At that point, you need another organisation, you need another tyre to put onto that car. So very much being a second tier is a great way of trying to circumnavigate the preferred suppliers list. You're not trying to replace organisations on there, you're trying to be a second string to that bow. The other one is that really emphasising that as the second tier, you will try harder than those who are first. Avis Rent-A-Car very much used to play on this as the second biggest supplier of rental cars in the world. They very much, second to Hertz, they very much used to say, look, we know we're second to Hertz, that's why we'll try even harder to get your business. The third way is often PSLs are held by either procurement departments or HR departments. In recruitment, it's often HR. Now, they may not be the actual decision makers. They, if you like, are the channel that the decision makers are going through. So one of the key things that you need to do is find out the actual department that in recruitment would be recruiting the individual, or in your particular industry, what is it that you're selling? So from our perspective, we're often selling sales training, for example. So does that mean that I should really be going to the sales director and trying to get to them? And if they then recommend me, they may be able to get me onto that preferred suppliers list. And then lastly, the Trojan horse. It's really leading in with something that you know the company will absolutely have to buy. If you have that, then again, you can circumnavigate, because they may be in a situation where they have to choose you, in which case, if they choose you, then you'll have to go onto the PSL. So that's very much a few ways around the PSL. First of all, why do organisations have it? Secondly, what are some of the pitfalls in actually getting on there? A little bit about, how do you get on there? But lastly, how do you circumnavigate your way around the PSL if you're not currently on there? So have fun, get out there. If somebody says I have a PSL, first of all, don't believe them, challenge them. And if they do, either try and get on there or find a way around it. Good luck and sell well. We look forward to speaking to you next time in this series of ISMM modules.